G'day listeners and welcome to another APS Weekly News Bulletin, keeping you up to date and well informed on the Australian housing market. Today's stories are what I would do if I was a Federal Housing Minister and Australian Population Update 2025. Story number one, guys, Population Update 2025 article by Michael Mudisic. Strong population growth will increase housing demand both to buy and rent. Australia's population growth rose by some 550,000 people last year. This is similar to a 10,000 increase in the country's population per week. It's 50% more than the average annual population increase over the past 5 years. The big winners when comparing the 2024's population increase with the past 5 years' annual average are New South Wales and Victoria, and this is because the states attract the lion's share of Australia's immigration. Queensland and Western Australia also attract a high level of overseas migrants. These states also attracted almost all of the net interstate migration, that is internal population movements within Australia during 2024. So in summary, Victoria increased by 165,000 new residents last year, New South Wales up by 143,000, Queensland 125, and Western Australia 81,000 people. These four states captured in total 94% of Australia's population growth during 2024. Looking forward, the latest estimates from the ABS suggest that Australia's population is expected to increase by 470,000 new people per annum over the next 5 years. This is based on the high projection outlook, which for the last decade has been trending closer to reality than the typically used medium series. Over the next 5 years, by 2030, Australia's population is expected to grow by 2.3 million residents, lifting the total populations from 27.5 million to just shy of 30 million people. We will need to build another Perth in terms of population size to accommodate this projected growth, which is actually pretty crazy to think about. There will be the need to build some 1.2 million new dwellings over this period of time, 240,000 each year over the next 5 years to accommodate this expected increase in people. Some 80% of this growth is expected to settle in New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. When including Western Australia, these four states will likely hold some 90% of the population increase between now and 2030. Guys, to throw that in, right, it's a bit of a summary really to think about. We're talking about another 2.5 million people roughly getting a country to 30 million people and doing that by 2030. Now, leading into COVID, we obviously weren't in anywhere near of an undersupplied market like we are right now. If anything, there was a lot of areas that were a bit oversupplied. There was, vacancy rates were pretty stable around about 2 to 3%. And there was quite a lot of stock on market in a lot of locations as well, kind of during that time frame. So kind of fast forward 5 years to where we are right now, the fact that there's stock across most of Australia is pretty tight. The vacancy rate is extremely tight. And we're talking about, doing another 2.5 million people over the next 5 years, and we're already severely undersupplied. If a really easy correlation can be drawn out of that, it's that we have nowhere near enough homes. We're still growing by a massive amount. And that this supply, principle, which is in a massive imbalance at the moment, is only going to continue to be constrained. The housing market constrained to a very, very tight level. So, I think it's an interesting thing they're putting out the forecast that they're charging for that many people by 2030. Obviously, the more people we have in the economy, the more people that are spending, the more the economy world goes around, all the rest of sort of stuff from that end. But in reality, we are seriously behind on an actual building deficit and a building shortage, and that thing really needs to be shored up and absolutely punched out and lead up to 2030 if they're going to have any chance of really getting on top of the housing crisis by then. Story number two, guys, what I would do if I was a Federal Housing Minister. This article is once again by Michael Mudisic and not actually by myself. What I would do if I was a Federal Housing Minister: at present, over 60% of our domestic credit goes to housing-related activities and just over 30% goes to business. A generation ago, these were the opposite. In this article, he has a chart here and saying this is one of the most telling charts in the Australian economy, yet it gets little airplay, nor is it regularly updated. My aim as Housing Minister would be to reverse these proportions over the next 25 years, if not sooner. Now, just to reiterate, guys, for any of you who are listening to this, not obviously, say, watching this on YouTube or something, at present, over 60% of our domestic credit goes to housing-related activities and just over 30% goes to business. A generation ago, these were the opposite, and exactly as he's saying here, as him as like housing minister, or like what he would be trying to do in the economy is actually reverse this. So you get 30% to go towards housing and 60% back towards business in terms of credit. Now, the reason for that is because the more credit that goes into business and actually driving economic growth from that perspective would employ more people and effectively pump more into the economy, as opposed to everything like now really being driven, so much of the economy is actually being driven by the housing market, and so much being pushed from there, and so many people, taking credit from that housing market perspective as well. So as he's saying there, he would flip the lid on that and try and push a higher proportion of credit and borrowed money to go towards business to drive further economic growth from a business perspective and an employment perspective as opposed to housing. Now, to keep punching through, he says, here are the 10 things that I would do. Now, take into account, this is Michael's, this is not my opinion. And obviously what he's talking about here is really trying to move the housing market to a status quo. So this wouldn't help us as investors, but this is what he would do as housing minister. Number 1, all states and territories to remove stamp duties, and federally we will remove the investor capital gains tax discount and negative gearing tax breaks for resale homes. This would be phased in over a 5-year period for investors who are currently negatively geared. Also, negative gearing for new homes would only stay in play for 5 years too. Number 2, impose a broad-based land tax on all properties set at between 2.5% and 5% per annum, depending on use, tenure, and length of time. Overseas interests pay a higher rate per annum. Too many land bank, and this would bring it to a close. Too many land bank, and the idea of this would help bring it to a close from people overseas. Introduce a capital gains tax on all properties with a percentage set to decline on length of time held. Under 2 years, say 20%, 2 to 5 years, 15%, over 25 years, 1%, etc., etc. This would be to help stop flipping. Number 4, stop all first home buyer grants and related gifts. They just stuff things up by making housing less affordable, distorting the building cycle and resulting in fewer first home buyers than would otherwise be the case. Number 5, you cannot use more than 50% of your SMSF assets to buy an investment dwelling. Number 6, same set of development and building rules across the country, varying only due to climatic conditions. Number 7, infrastructure charges per new dwelling are also the same across Australia, set at 5% of final vacant land or new dwelling sales price and not a flat fee, and payable on final settlement. Now, just to quickly cap on the two of those guys, the same set of development and building rules across the country, and then same infrastructure rules across the country as well. The reason he would bring those in, and actually this is something that should be the case, is it would create a same set of just laws across the whole country that would make it significantly easier to get developments through council done, dusted, and actually bringing product, both land and new builds, to market. One of the biggest issues we have from a supply constraint across the whole country is every single council literally has a hand on what they get approved in an area. Now, it might make sense from a specific council perspective, but from actually developing across the country, there should be some level of consistency that would allow developers to literally be able to open up anywhere as long as there was land, especially for areas that are in serious supply constraints, that they would be able to bring more product more quickly to the market. I know when I used to look at developing, in south of Sydney all the years ago, there were certain councils you literally didn't touch because you knew it would take 3 years to get a subdivision out of council if you ever got it out of council at all. These areas went into massive undersupply when the markets went through boom, and it just created the markets booming a lot further. Now, from a property investor owning property in that area, that was a good thing. But for locals trying to get into the market and actually housing product being readily available, they killed the market. First home buyers weren't able to buy there, and they had to move to different councils to actually be able to afford because prices skyrocketed so much. So it would be creating uniformity across the board that, development could be pushed through and red tape cut from that perspective. Number 8, developers and builders are responsible for all shonky workmanship within a specified time frame and with fair caveats, not the general public. Number 9, no Australian passport, no ability to buy, regardless of dwelling type, development status, or origin of purchaser. Number 10, all publicly promoted, exposed housing market-related research, such as price growth predictions, must go through a peer panel review, and an equally weighted con argument must run alongside the pro pitch. Now, in summary, guys, really jumping over this thing, it was just something that I thought it was interesting to sort of unpack and put together. But effectively, the way he would try and bring equilibrium about the market, and again, remember, this is not from an investor perspective, this is actually just to make housing more affordable across the country and try and solve a lot of the problems, especially from a supply deficit perspective. It's phasing out state taxes that are so varied across the board, things like stamp duty, grants, land tax, all these sorts of things, and making everything uniform and lateral across the board, effectively creating one housing market as opposed to different cities, councils, states within different, locations, and effectively making Australia a very, congruent across the board, housing market to be assessed from that perspective. Cutting red tape, getting more things to market, getting rid of things like capital gains tax discounts, stopping things like flipping. All these sorts of things would help, obviously from an actual fundamental perspective to bring housing, to make housing more affordable to the average Australian. But the simple fact is it would be extremely unlikely that much of this stuff, if any of this stuff, comes to fruition. I think it would probably depend, even, leaning back on the first article we went through of 2.5 million people coming to Australia, population growing by 2.5 million people by 2030. We're talking about a 5 to 6 year window effectively to hit that, and then hit another 2.5 million people when we're building nowhere near enough homes. Unless something really drastic happens in that time frame, I don't see too much of this stuff actually coming to fruition or ever really being passed, especially when so much of it is governed state to state, and they govern it so closely from that perspective, and it's such a massive revenue producer, especially things like land tax and stamp duty as well. So even though some of these would create, I think, across the board a bit of, uniformity, unilateral sort of consistency across the whole of the country, I don't think we'll ever really move into that phase, too tightly held. And really, from an investment perspective, we probably don't ever really want too much of this stuff being played with. As nice as it would be, and as much as we'd love stamp duty to be cut and all these other things sort of to be cut and everything as well, you can't really cut some things without cutting others. So really, I love just an equilibrium state of play and just working in what we've got to work with all the time and nothing really changing, because you can work within that, understand it, maximize it from that perspective. Interesting thing to unpack regardless. Guys, that's another APS Weekly News Bulletin. I hope you took some great value out of it. If you did, please send it to someone else you think might also take some great value out of it. And until next week, guys, it's another APS Weekly News Bulletin on the Scouting Australia podcast.